In 1980, Superman II was released. At the time, it was seen as a worthy follow-up to the 1978 original, pitting Superman, as played by Christopher Reeve, against the villainous General Zod, impossible odds, and the attempt to balance his hero life with his love for reporter Lois Lane. However, since release, general perception on this sequel seems to have soured a little. Many, like myself, still love it, but many others don't. See, the production of the Superman movies was somewhat troubled. Director Richard Donner intended to shoot both Superman and Superman 2 at the same time, and got most of the way through one and roughly halfway through 2 before the studio kindly asked him to finish the first one and just wait a little bit to finish 2. In the interim between finishing 1 and going back to 2, relationships between Donner and producers Alexander and Ilya Salkind had disintegrated, and he was replaced by director Richard Lester, who finished 2 as he saw fit. Superman 2, as seen in 1980, is a hybrid of the footage initially shot by Donner and new material shot by Lester, both reshooting some of Donner's material and filling in the blanks that Donner never got to shoot in the first place. This is, in my eyes, a largely successful movie, but in 2006, an attempt at a Richard Donner cut was assembled, cutting together a version of Superman 2 as close to Donner's original intentions using Donner's original footage, never before seen footage of Marlon Brando initially intended for 2, all new digital effects, and on occasion test footage. Many hail this as the superior cut. I don't. I feel it's messy and occasionally incoherent on account of Donner trying to use as little footage shot by Lester as possible. But I also recognize that the original Lester cut has its own glitches. There are some jokes inserted into the proceedings that aren't nearly as funny as Lester thinks they are, for example. But what if there were a way of marrying the two cuts, taking what works best about each and putting them together? Well, that is what we will be doing today. 3 years after I said I'd do this. Oh yeah, I'm good at keeping a schedule. First things first, we need to set some rules for this little thought experiment because I like to self-regulate. Rule number 1, I will be working only with footage that was shot at the time. My concept here is that I want to put together the best possible cut of this movie with the limitations of what existed of the movie at the time. This means, functionally, that Jor-El will still be largely present from my cut. I know, but listen. One of the things that is immediately clear in the Donner cut is that the effects for Jor-El's hologram for Superman 2 were only halfway finished. Like, it's all finished for this scene where Clark tells Jor-El he loves Lois, but for most of everything else, it's not, being assembled digitally after the fact. And that's fine for what the Donner cut is, but for the purposes of this experiment, it doesn't work for me. So overall, I'm still going with Lara as played by Susanna York for the sake of both consistency and remaining true to what existed of the movie in 1980. The second rule is to do with material used. Due to my personal preferences, this cut will largely center around the Lester cut, using it as sort of the backbone of the proceedings. But the other key source will of course be the Donner cut. Both variations of it. For reasons known only to Warner Brothers, for a time there was an extended version of the Donner cut on streaming services which ran at 2 hours and 2 minutes rather than the Blu-ray's 1 hour 55. This version of the Donner cut reinstates a lot of the action in East Houston, Idaho, which the disc version haphazardly cuts out a lot of, I guess, to minimize Lester footage in the movie. This longer version of the Donner cut also contains a couple of deleted scenes I want, so where appropriate I will be using those. The final rule is about quality. Much like the 1978 Superman movie, a separate cut of Superman 2 was prepared for TV syndication, one that runs at 2 hours and 20 minutes. However, this cut only exists at the moment as a low-res videotape copy recorded from a TV broadcast. While nobody but me will be seeing this rough edit I use as my proof of concept to myself, I will still only be using footage at least of DVD quality. So while I will occasionally pull deleted scenes from the DVDs and the Blu-rays, I will not be using this international cut as it's come to be known as. It's just too much headache for me to cut to low-res videotape from higher-res digital quality. Am I limiting myself a little bit with these rules? Maybe. But to me this means I have to do a little bit of problem solving. How can I rework this movie to work a bit better with just this available to me? Well, let's find out. The first target for editing is in the prologue. As presented in the original theatrical cut, the film takes us on a trip back to Krypton, playing John Williams' awesome Krypton theme as rearranged by Ken Thorne. When we arrive on Krypton, we watch the Zod Squad kill a dude, break a crystal I guess, and then get captured and put on a hasty trial before being trapped in the Phantom Zone. Noticeably absent in this version of things is Jor-El. In the scene in the 1978 movie this is flashing back to, Jor-El was very present, acting as Zod's prosecutor. But in this version he is gone, replaced by an off-screen voice who yells at the Zod Squad about how much they suck. This kind of sucks. Beyond the removal of Jor-El, there is also the lazy blue screen used here, and the fact that this kind of makes no sense. What is this crystal? What are they doing here? You don't get to know. It is worth noting that in the shooting script for this, there is a bit more motivation, suggesting that this was meant to take place in the Parliament of Krypton scene in the first movie, and that it was part of Zod's coup against them. But I guess they ran out of money, so shite blue screen it is. So how do we mend this? by turning to the Donner Cut. Now, I want to keep this warp to Krypton from the Lester Cut because it's cool, but once we get to Krypton, we're cutting to this model shot from the Donner Cut, which leads right into its reprise of the Kryptonian trial, which does include Jor-El. However, once the Kryptonian Council declares the Zod Squad guilty of treason, we're gonna go back to the Lester Cut. See, in the Donner Cut, the reprise plays pretty close to how things go in the 1978 movie, where Zod screams, "You will bow down before me, Jor-El!" before he's imprisoned in the Phantom Zone. But in the Lester Cut, this speech is played as the Phantom Zone spins away into the abyss of deep space, leading right into the opening credits. Now, in terms of narrative consistency, the Donner Cut is better. But in terms of drama, "You will bow down before me, both you and then, one day, your heirs!" leading straight into the Superman fanfare is a lot more dramatic. I think it adds a nice flair to the movie, so we're going with that assembly of things. As for the credits themselves, we will be once again sticking with the Lester Cut. While the Donner Cut's credits are a lot simpler and a little shorter, there's something missing from them, I feel. Perhaps it's that it's clearly an attempt at doing the style of the iconic 1978 film's credits, but it doesn't work for me. On the other hand, the Lester Cut uses the opening titles to play out a recap of the first Superman movie, a sort of the story so far montage intercut with the space credits. This rules, so this is what we're going to use for this cut. After the credits, we have a choice to make. See, the two cuts of Superman 2 have very different scenes here. The Lester Cut moves to the Daily Planet, where it establishes a threat for Superman to take on in Paris. The Donner Cut also moves to the planet, but instead it takes time to establish that Lois is close to working out Clark's secret identity. Which one are we going with? That's right, we're going to Paris. This might not be a choice that everyone agrees with, especially those who prefer the Donner Cut, and to be fair, I can understand that, but there are a couple of reasons why I'm going with the scene in Paris. The first is personal preference. While the scene at this point in the movie in the Donner Cut is fun, it kicks off the Donner Cut's approach to telling the story of how Lois comes to know Clark's secret identity. However, the way this particular plotline plays out in the Donner Cut isn't my favorite, and relies on test footage of Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder shot before the 1978 film to even pay off properly, so I will instead be using the Lester Cut's exploration of this plot. The second reason is related to pacing. See, Superman doesn't actually turn up until 40 minutes into the Donner Cut, when he saves a boy from falling into Niagara Falls. Had I used the Donner Cut scene here, I would have been committing to the same thing here. However, in using the Paris set piece, we get a nice piece of Superman action inside the first 15 minutes, much more preferable to me personally. And finally, the reason I'm going with the Paris thing is, if I'm not using the Donner Cut reprise that establishes that the Zod Squad escaped the Phantom Zone courtesy of the nuclear missiles Superman threw into space in the first movie, these guys need to get out somehow, so Paris it is. Anyway, for the sake of clarity, what happens here is that a band of terrorists seize the Eiffel Tower. They have a hydrogen bomb, I guess, and they want their never elaborated on demands met, or they will just vaporize Paris. It's a classic piece of Superman action. Baddies, bombs, Lois getting herself in trouble due to her unimpeded devotion to the story, all the good stuff. The upshot is that Superman's solution is to just chuck the lift the hydrogen bomb is in out into space, where it explodes and frees the Krypton crew. It's pretty awesome, but it also isn't perfect, so in this cut, I'm gonna take some liberties with this whole set piece. Now, everything from the establishing shot of the planet, where Clark is introduced to this conflict, to Lois arriving at the Eiffel Tower will remain unedited. I like everything in Perry White's office, and Superman's change in the alley is pretty great. But when Lois arrives at the Eiffel Tower, the pacing takes a bit of a hit. Fortunately, it's easy to remedy this. First of all, this scene where Lois interviews the mayor of Paris about the bomb, gone. We don't need it. It's just telling us what we already know. Instead, we'll see Lois arrive in the taxi, get all the information from the mayor that we need that the terrorists are letting some hostages go, then cut to Lois tricking a police officer so she can get up into the tower. It's a small edit, but I think we've already improved the pacing a little bit here. The same goes for this scene when the hostages are loaded into this first lift. While this guy's line reading of "You're being released, so shut up" is hilarious, it's a scene that doesn't tell us much that we either don't know already or won't get into in just a minute. So we'll keep this first shot of Lois running up the stairs, then cut all the way to the second time we see the hostages as they're being transferred from one lift to the other. We get all the information of the original cut, but make the pacing just that little bit snappier, I think. Another quick cut I'll make here is to cut this scene with the terrorists talking about the bomb short. Everything after the line,
"I hope you have not many sins left to be forgiven, because if you let go of that, you only have 60 seconds to list them,"
is kind of superfluous, so out it goes. Instead, I'm going to cut from that line to the police rigging the charges to blow the lift's cables so they can retrieve the bomb. Maybe these are small changes, but I think they help the scene all the same. Besides, what's the point of doing my own cut of the movie if I can't allow a little my own artistic license in the proceedings? However, after these little cuts, I'll leave the movie alone for a while. The lift still drops, Superman still throws that bastard into space when the bomb explodes, the Krypton crew still busts out here. Incidentally, the effects shots from the Lester cut are standard, saying. I happen to think they're kind of cool, and the digital effects in the Donner cut are dog ass. Anyway, at this point in the theatrical cut, we move from the Zob Squad flying towards the moon back to Metropolis for some cute Clark and Lois stuff. This is a nice little collection of things that starts on the street where Clark gets hit by a car, then moves indoors for Lois to make orange juice and tell Clark she's looking out for him while Clark expresses jealousy of Superman. Now, some might cut this as it's pretty full of Lester stuff, but not me. I like it. I like seeing Clark and Lois operate as friends before the turn of Lois finding out who he is. I think that builds to that plotline nicely. However, I will be trimming the stuff on the street just a little bit. In the original cut, there's a shot of the taxi that hit Clark all crumpled up, and the people around it just kind of shrugging it off like, yeah, shit happens. This seems silly to me. Like, is this not a dead giveaway that Clark is Superman? So I'm deleting that shot. That way, as the crash is assembled, it can be implied less that Clark was hit by that taxi, and more that he stopped close enough to almost hit him. Problem solved. Once we've had this cute little scene, it's time to establish the stakes of the movie and the villains within. Over the next couple of scenes, some important things are revealed to us. In the Lester cut, it plays out in this order. Lex Luthor's in prison, complaining and plotting his escape. The Kryptonians land on the moon and kill the crew of a joint US-Soviet moon mission. Luthor escapes prison by means of hot air balloon piloted by Miss Tessmacher, leaving Otis behind in the process. Overall, I'm not making a lot of changes to this section of the movie. While the Donner cut of the prison laundry scene contains some extra material, it's not material I think the movie especially needs. The joke about their cellmate being a bedwetter isn't particularly funny, nor is the fact that the punchline is haha Otis is about to get beaten up, so we'll leave that out of this cut. A similar philosophy applies to the scene on the moon. The only thing that really changes between the cuts of this scene is the score. The Lester cut uses an original score whipped up by Ken Thorne, whereas the Donner cut uses cues written for the first movie by John Williams. I will be sticking with the Thorne score here because it's overall better suited for this movie on account of actually being written for it. It is, however, worth highlighting a problem with this movie that I would like to fix that begins to pop up in this scene given time and resources. General Zod's voice. Throughout the theatrical cut of this film, both General Zod and Ursa's voice have been redone in post. Zod's voice redubbed by Terrence Stamp and then lowered in pitch, and Sarah Douglas's voice largely being completely replaced by that of Annie Ross.
The more our molecular density gives us unlimited powers.
They come from there. A place called Houston.
Now, if you're only watching the Lester cut, this is something you can grow to live with, but in the Donner cut, his footage of Zod is unedited, which means that his natural unpitched voice is used. The effect of this is that when you watch the Donner cut, and this would also be the case in my personal cut, you will hear the Lester deepened voice, then for a single line it will go back to Stamp's original voice, before then going back to the redubs.
You cannot bargain with what you don't have.
Jor-El, our jailer.
This is distracting. In an ideal world, Stamp's original audio for all of his scenes would be available to us, but this isn't an ideal world. So I have two options available to me. Pitch all of Zod's dialogue in the Donner footage down a tone to be consistent with the Lester cut, or go through the Lester cut and pitch all instances of Stamp's voice back up a tone to be consistent with his natural voice. Both approaches, of course, rely on having a copy of the film where you can isolate the dialogue from the rest of the soundtrack. Reasonably easy to do if you happen to have a copy of the Blu-ray and know some basic isolation techniques, but that's a lot of work for this assembly that I'm basically doing as a proof of concept, so we'll pretend I actually did this and move on. However, when we go back to prison, we will be pulling from the Donner cut largely. This is because at the end of the prison break scene, there is a conversation between Luthor and Miss Tessmacher, where Luthor establishes that he wants to follow his Alpha Wave tracker, something he whipped up in prison to track Superman, to head north and find Superman's secrets. Why are we going with the Donner cut here? Because in the Lester cut, this conversation happens later. In that cut of the film, the balloon has been inexplicably in the air overnight and made it above the timberline before Lex and Tessmacher have this conversation. This is very silly. That balloon is not making it that far, and it seems ridiculous that there wouldn't be a conversation about where they're headed earlier than this. So, the Donner cut we're going with. Anyway, once Lex and Tessmacher are up and away in their beautiful balloon, we move on to Niagara Falls and the biggest pain in my ass in this edit. The middle of the movie. The middle of this movie in both cuts is a pacing nightmare. Okay, that's a little dramatic. In the Lester cut it's fine, but occasionally hampered by some very odd cuts such as Superman flying off to pick flowers being sandwiched between scenes in East Houston of Zod and the gang straight killing people. In the Donner cut it becomes somewhat convoluted, as Donner straight removing scenes he doesn't like, mucks with the pacing a little bit, and rearranges the scenes in several strange ways. For example, the scene where Zod lands on Earth is cut in half and placed before and after Lois learns Clark's secret. So I will be straight with you, my assembly of this sequence of events is also probably not perfect. but I will justify it as best I can, because there are scenes in this movie that I really do not know what the hell to do with. To begin with, I'm following the way the Donnercut assembles things. After Lex and Tessmarker float away in their balloon, we're going to Niagara Falls to meet up with Clark and Lois as they begin their undercover investigation of the honeymoon racket. However, unlike the Donnercut, which cuts this scene off before we see the interior of their hotel room, I will play this scene almost out in entirety. The first reason is that cutting this scene off like the Donnercut does is just really awkward, and the second reason is we need to know what Clark and Lois are doing in Niagara Falls. Now, the Donnercut tells us a bit earlier in a scene in the Daily Planet, but we don't have that in my cut, and the full scene in the Lester cut tells us while they're there, so we're keeping it. I will, however, still be cutting this scene a bit short. Towards the end of this scene, there's a joke about Clark awkwardly asking about the sleeping arrangements in the room.
Mr. Smith?
Uh-huh.
The complimentary couch.
Right.
Now, after this joke, there's an extra bit where Clark discovers that the bed vibrates. It's a cute joke, but I honestly think it's a little bit funnier to cut it right after.
Right.
So that is what I'm doing. Again, in following the spirit of the Donnercut, we will be moving from Niagara Falls over to Lex of the Arctic, discovering Superman's fortress and the secrets within. However, I will be using the Lester cut version of this scene, which has Clark's mother, Lara, explain the history of the Zod Squad to Lex, as opposed to the Donnercut, which does its best to digitally insert archive footage of Marlon Brando as Jor-El telling the story. The reason, in short, is I don't like the digital assembly of the Jor-El stuff. I know it was a necessary step to make the Donnercut work, but it doesn't look good. The effects for Lara, on the other hand, are actually complete, and so look better in my mind. So it's the Lester cut version of this scene here, but its placement in the assembly is inspired by Donner's cut. I contain multitudes. So, after Lex learns the plot of the movie, in the Donnercut, it cuts back to Niagara Falls to watch Superman save a boy from falling into the falls. Once again, I will be following this flow, though more here out of necessity than anything else. We haven't seen the rescue, and we kinda need to for the rest of the movie to make sense. However, here there will be a couple of deviations. One towards the Lester cut, and one entirely of my own making. The Lester cut deviation is, again, letting a scene play out that Donner didn't. See, in the Donner cut, after Superman rescues this boy and flies off, the scene cuts off as Lois says, "What's the hurry?" and moves to the next scene. In the Lester cut, the scene continues further, with Lois musing out loud about Clark's absence and then confronting Clark about it. I'm keeping all of that because we need to build up Lois's suspicion that Clark is Superman. But after this, is a choice entirely of my own. In the Lester cut, Lois tests her theory that Clark is Superman by chucking herself in a river. This is a fun scene which has Clark attempt to save Lois without revealing his powers and actually succeed in temporarily convincing Lois that he isn't Superman. However, this scene is absent from the Donner cut, which presents me with a problem. As I've been largely following the skeleton of the Donner cut so far, I need somewhere to put this scene. So what I'm gonna do is tack it on the end of this scene.
Superman? You mean he was here?
Mm-hmm.
Golly.
And you weren't, as usual. You know, it's really amazing. I never started to put it together before now.
Now, I'll be the first to admit it, this isn't a perfect patch, but when playing with the order of this and the following scenes like a deck of cards, it became apparent to me that this was the best way to order these scenes without disrupting a narrative flow too much. I also think it's kind of fun to structure it so to us, Lois just immediately risks her life to prove a point once she's formulated it. I kind of love it when Lois is impulsive, and it feels in character for the person who just climbed a lift with a bomb in it like a day ago. Anything I've lost to pacing is made up in character work is what I'm saying, and I'm happy to make that trade-off. As for what to do next, we'll quickly turn to the Lester cut. After Lois dunks herself in the river in that cut, it's over to Middle America to herald the arrival of Zod and the gang. Here they walk on water, set fire to snakes, and just generally enjoy their newfound power. So I will be following Lester's lead here. Also, like in the Lester cut, I will be playing this scene in full. The Donner cut slices this scene in half and sticks the second half somewhere else, but quite frankly, I hate that, so in my cut, it's staying in one piece. For a second here, we'll stay in the Lester cut assembly of things and move to the scene where Lois really finds out who Clark is. Two versions of this scene exist. The Lester version where Clark trips and falls into the fire in the honeymoon hotel, and the Donner version which uses test footage to reconstruct Donner's initial intentions. I've already ragged on the use of this footage, so I think you can guess which version I'm going with. The thing is, this isn't just motivated by fuck the test footage reasons, it's also motivated by internal coherence reasons. After all, Lois just jumped in a river, keeping the version of this scene where she's drying off after doing so just makes sense. I also like the implications of Clark's character in this scene, that he just naturally tripped on the horrific pink bear in this room. A more modern read of Superman is that the Clark persona isn't as much of a facade as we think, that he can actually be as clumsy as he pretends to be.
Sorry. So sorry. That was totally my fault. Sorry.
You really have that klutzy thing down, don't you?
Yeah, no, that was actually real.
This is a read on the character I really like, and I kind of love the idea that his genuine clumsiness is what gives him up to Lois, so yeah, this version of the scene is much better to me in pretty much every way. After this scene, the Donner cut gives us the second half of the Zod in the country scene that I cut out earlier, then moves on to Clark and Lois flying to the Fortress of Solitude. However, as that half of the scene is actually connected to the rest of it like it should be in my cut, we will just move from the hotel room to the two already flying. I did go back and forth on this cut for a bit, but in the end I decided it works. At the end of the hotel room scene, Lois suggests that they should change, so cutting from that to Clark in his Superman attire, now not hiding anything from Lois.
Maybe you should too.
I don't know. I think it works. Okie dokie, let's hop back on the Donner cut skeleton. In that cut, after Clark and Lois arrive at the fortress, it cuts over to the bit where Zod and the gang bully some cops. So we're gonna go over there, but under protest. To explain that comment, I really don't know what the hell to do with this scene. In a film I really love, it's a scene that is just really stupid. I don't care much for it at all. But it's almost impossible to remove from the movie. Not because it's necessary, because it isn't, but if you take it out, both the Lester and Donner structures of this movie become unstable. It would mean shuffling the scenes around even more to compensate for, and I couldn't really think of anything that flowed in a satisfying way once it was gone. More to the point, these assholes appear later in the film, in a way that implies that we should already know who they are, so this shit kind of has to stay where it is. However, since it is here, I am playing out in full. The Donner cut does trim it a bit, cutting some dialogue between the cops at the beginning of the scene and abruptly cutting away when Zod shoots himself with their gun. I think this makes the scene more awkward, however, so I'm keeping that dialogue between the cops and playing the scene out till Non rips the light off the police car and offers it to Zod. It's a silly bit, but I kinda like making Non an almost lovable monster, and it sets up something else that I'm putting into the movie. Some of you might know where this is headed. Yeah, I'm putting that scene back in, but we'll come back to that. So where do we go from here? In the Lester cut, Clark and Lois fly to the fortress after this scene with the cops, and the Donner cut jumps all the way to Clark and Lois having dinner. Well, one version of the Donner cut, anyway. For a time, there was a longer version of the Donner cut available on streaming. Why fucking who knows? Anyway, this version of the Donner cut plays out a little something like this. Zod and crew bully the cops. Then we get a scene unique to this cut where Clark prepares a souffle for dinner with his heat vision, which is cute enough. After this, we get the first half of the fight in East Houston, where Ursa beats up some sexist farmers, and Zod reveals his telekinesis, I guess. After all that, we see Clark and Lois at dinner, and the cut proceeds as the Donner cut does on disc. This extended Donner cut has provided the way forward for me, kind of. We will cut to another Clark and Lois scene after the cop stuff, but it won't be this souffle scene, cute though it is. There's a scene from the Lester cut we're gonna use instead. In this scene, Clark explains the history of the green crystal to Lois, then flies off to get dinner and pick flowers for her. The important thing I want from this scene is that Lois absent-mindedly leaves the crystal lying around. This will be important later. Now, in the way I've assembled it, I've left in a bit in the middle of all this where we see Clark fly into a rainforest to pick flowers, but I could see the argument that this isn't wholly necessary and might hurt the pacing a little bit. If you do cut this bit, however, what happens is that Clark runs off shot, Lois sits there for a second, and then almost instantaneously Clark returns with shopping and a flower. That is admittedly a pretty funny idea. So while I'm not cutting that bit out, I can also see the merit in doing so. So anyway, now we move on to the scene in East Houston. As I said earlier, this bit is largely just Zod and Ursa beating people up while Non harasses some chickens. But at the end of this scene, I'm adding something. A scene that is also present in the extended version of the Donner cut from streaming. Throughout the scene, there is this boy who watches the carnage Zod and Ursa unleash. He is present in the Lester cut, but inexplicably sounds like Oliver Twist, despite being from the middle of Idaho.
Please, Mr. General, please let my daddy down.
In this extended Donner cut, however, his voice has been replaced by that of an American child.
Please, Mr. General, please let my daddy down.
So for obvious reasons, I'm using the Donner audio here, but after Zod does exactly what the boy says and lets his daddy down, lethally, the extended Donner cut adds something not present in the Lester cut at all. See, this boy runs over to his horse and hops on, riding over to the next town to fetch help. Zod doesn't take very kindly to this and motions at Non. Non then throws the light he nicked from the cop car at this child so hard that he fucking explodes. Now, this is all at a distance, so not super graphic, but still. Non just murdered a child. And just to put the bow on this grim little piece, this happens.
He was only a boy who will never become a man.
Oh my god. And yet, I'm keeping this. Yeah, hashtag release the child murder cut, am I right? Now, is this scene a bit much? Maybe. but I think it works. I think illustrating that the Zod Squad are this ruthless and evil helps the stakes of the movie, and makes it all the more chilling when the extended Donner cut cuts back to Clark and Lois having a pleasant meal, further illustrating that he's about to make a very big mistake. So, like the extended Donner cut, I will be cutting from child murder to Clark and Lois having dinner, but I will be using the Lester version of this scene, which ends with Lois saying she's off to change into something more comfortable. The reason I'm using this version of the scene will become apparent in a minute, but will no doubt annoy some people. More on that momentarily. One last time, I will follow the Donner cut, which cuts from this dinner scene back to East Houston, where Zod and the gang are demolishing the National Guard. I don't have any real big reason for doing this aside from the fact that it flows nicely, but after this scene I am pivoting away from the Donner cut in a big way. So yeah, I'm going with the Lester version of the scene where Clark gives up his powers for Lois, and I'm putting it here. The reason this scene is here is precisely because it's the Lester version. See, the Donner version of the depower scene happens after Clark and Lois sleep together, whereas the Lester version happens before. So structurally, if I'm using the Lester version of the scene, it needs to go here and not after. The next obvious question might be, why this version at all? Why not go with the Donner version of the scene? After all, the Donner version has Jor-El in it, and unlike every other Jor-El scene, apparently, they did actually do the vis effects for it back in the 70s, before Brando was told to hit the bricks, presumably. It fulfills my criteria for shot at the time, so why not use it? Well, here's the thing. I don't want to. Haha, it's my edit. I'll do whatever the fuck I want. Kidding. The truth is that since I've been using Lara this far out of lack of Jor-El stuff that was completed and looked good in earlier scenes, I might as well stick with her internal consistency and all that. I also just personally prefer a couple of things in the list amount of this scene. I really like Susanna York's performance as Lara. It genuinely touches me when her hologram steps out of the crystal. It gives the whole scene a sense of impact. And I really like this shot of Superman fading away in the red sun molecule chamber, leaving only Clark behind. I think it's poignant. Losing all of this stuff I really love in favor of sticking Marlon Brando back in this scene really felt like too big of a trade-off to me. So Clark loses his powers and he and Lois go to bed. After this, I'll cut back to East Houston simply because there's really nowhere else to go. Now, Zod is declaring that he rules the world and that the President of America will answer to him. After this, I will cut right to Zod flying towards the White House, ready to attack. Now, once again, I have a choice of two versions of this scene. In the Lester cut, Zod and the gang still use their heat vision to carve their faces onto Mount Rushmore, which is very silly. In the Donner cut, however, they knock over the Washington Monument, which is realized with a very shoddy digital effect. Neither scene really grabbed me as great choices, but I did attempt a cut of this where it goes from Zod yelling in East Houston to Clark and Lois sleeping to Zod and the gang rolling up on the White House, and something felt missing. So in loyalty to my shot at the time rule, I'm going with the Mount Rushmore thing. For a while here, things will actually follow the Lester assembly of things. Everything from Zod and the crew arriving at the White House all the way to Luthor making a deal with the Kryptonians will happen in the same order as it does in the Lester cut. The Zod crew take the White House, Clark gets his shit rocked in a diner and immediately goes back to the fortress, Lex meets Zod. However, I will address a couple of things here I'm changing and justify the thing that I'm not. The first change is to the battle in the White House. Here I'll use the Donner version of that scene. Why? Because in that cut, Zod grabs a rifle and starts shooting people with it. The image of a Kryptonian who can laser your face off with his eyes, resorting to something as crude as a gun, is hilarious actually, and I want to keep it. The other change is to the scene where Lex meets the Kryptonians. See, there's a bit of dialogue in the Donner cut that is missing in the Lester cut, which I think Lester was an idiot for cutting out.
What I am bargaining with is what you do not have. The son of Jor-El.
The son of Jor-El?
I said that, didn't I?
Jor-El, our jailer.
No, Jor-El, the baseball player. Yes, Jor-El, your jailer.
It boggles the mind that Lester could cut this, and it actually produces a continuity error in his cut where Lex moves like halfway around the Oval Office between cuts, so I am reinstating it here. And the thing I should justify the version of the scene where Clark goes back to the fortress to get his powers back I am using is the Lester version. I know, but hear me out. The thing is, for all the hype of finally the scene that explains how Clark got his powers back, the scene in the Donner cut with Jor-El doesn't actually tell us anything that we can't gather from the Lester cut. As the Lester cut is assembled, we see the crystal glow awesomely at Clark. We don't see him for a while, and then the next time we see him, he has his powers back. Like, yeah, the crystal repowered him. I put that together when I was 6, watching this for the first time through wide eyes. If a baby can put it together from this context, I think we're okay without seeing the nitty-gritty of how that works. Moreover, I think Lester actually did something better than Donner here. In the Donner version of the scene, Clark delivers a monologue about how badly he failed to the fortress, which is as bright as we've always seen it. In the Lester remount, the fortress is dark and moody. Clark's words here are less poetic, but for my money, more real.
Well, I really wish you could hear me, because I need you. I failed.
No shit, just watching that clip to edit this made me misty-eyed. Christopher Reeve was just that fucking good. The point is that Lester's remount of this scene really underlines just how low Clark's low point really is before the light from the green crystal becomes a beacon of hope that Clark can fix his mistakes and save the day. For a director who a lot of people shit on as being inferior to Donner, he knew his stuff. And that's no more obvious than in this scene. It is by a long way my preferred version of this scene, so it's the one I'm going with. Besides, as I said, I'm being loyal to my shot at the time policy, and the Jor-El stuff in the Donner cut could not have been more clearly put together from the archive footage in 2006, so it's the Lester version we're going with. At long last, this brings us to the final battle. The final battle of this movie is really interesting because it is the biggest victim of Lester's reshoot. More specifically, anything set in the Daily Planet is. See, when Lester remounted this scene during his shoots, the backdrop he used for the Metropolis cityscape is significantly worse than in the original Donner shoot. To make comparison, this is the original backdrop in the stuff originally shot by Donner, and this is the backdrop in the Lester footage. I do not like Lester's backdrop, not one bit. It's also in this scene where it's most obvious to my eye that two different cinematographers shot this movie. See, the Donner stuff, which was largely shot at the same time as the first Superman movie, was photographed by Jeffrey Unsworth, who also shot little-known indie sci-fi flick 2001: A Space Odyssey. However, in between completion of the first Superman and getting back to work on 2, Unsworth passed away. In fact, the first Superman is dedicated to his memory. So when it came time to finish 2, Lester hired DP Robert Paintner. Paintner does a respectable job, but in this scene it becomes clear that Paintner isn't Unsworth. So with absolutely no disrespect to Paintner or Lester, I'm going to be using as much of Donner's footage of the Daily Planet as humanly possible, with a couple of explicit exceptions. The first is the beginning of the scene where the Planet team discusses Superman's whereabouts. The first reason is that my edit cuts from Lex in the White House saying Australia to Perry's globe in his office settled on Australia, a cut I preserved from the Lester cut. I have always loved this cut, so I wanted to keep it. I did try to marry it to the Donner version of this discussion scene, which features Unsworth photography, but it produced a host of noticeable continuity errors both in blocking and performances, so I said fuck it, we're going with the reshoot stuff for this bit. At least here the backdrop outside the windows is far less noticeable, so I think I can get away with it. Fortunately, the Lester cut also used Donner's originally shot footage of Zod's rampage through the Planet office and the meeting between the Planet team and the villains. Gene Hackman refused to turn up for the reshoot, so anything with Lex Luthor in it was shot by Donner. The next piece of the Lester reshoots I'm keeping is in Superman's arrival, as it appears to have been Lester who shot Superman saying, "General, would you care to step outside?" I like this line a lot better than "Haven't you heard of freedom of the press?" the line used in the Donner cut, as it's a lot less of a mouthful. Finally, we come to the end of the battle scene, where Zod flies back to the planet to gloat and finds out about the Fortress of Solitude. For the most part, I'm going with Donner's version of this scene, as it's here that the backdrop in Lester's footage is at its worst. Now, this does come with a trade-off. See, in this scene, Lester reshot all of Zod's dialogue, which is then edited into Donner's footage of Lex Luthor to make it look seamless, though the two cuts appear to use different takes of Donner's sessions with Hackman. It's very interesting.
Bow, yield, kneel. That kind of stuff closes out of town. Bow, yield, kneel. That kind of stuff closes out of town.
Zod's response to this comment is vastly different between Donner's and Lester's footage. See, this is how Terrence Stamp delivered it originally when he was shooting with Donner.
Why do you say this to me when you know I will kill you for it?
And in his reshoots for Lester, he delivers it thusly.
Why do you say this to me when you know I will kill you for it?
See, the Donner cut is much more in character, I think, Zod reacting matter-of-factly to this spectacular insolence. But the Lester cut delivery is a hell of a lot funnier. It is genuinely hilarious that Zod's reaction to this insolence would be complete and utter confusion, as if he's asking, why would you choose to die like this? What's wrong with you? But I also really don't want to cut back to the reshoot stuff just to preserve a funny line read, so I have to go with the Donner take here. However, there is a section where my hands are tied, and I have to use the reshoot stuff. See, in the Donner cut, this scene doesn't really end. It cuts away prematurely as Lex sells out the location of the fortress in exchange for Cuba. The Lester reshoots, however, include a bit where Ursa decides to take Lois as collateral to threaten Superman. There is no equivalent footage in the Donner cut. So, right at the end of the scene, after avoiding the reshoots as much as I can, I have to use them, and they're very shitty backdrop. Sucks to be me, but I'd rather have an internally consistent narrative than not use it, so it is what it is. The stuff in the planet out of the way, let's talk about the Battle of Metropolis itself. For the most part, my intention is to stick to the Lester cut here. The Donner cut version of this battle is for the most part not quite as good. Here there are several additions of digital effects shots which do not match the optical effects or the blue screen of the original film at all. However, I will be using the Donner cut version of the finale of the battle. At the end of this battle, Zod and gang blow Metropolis with their super breath, destroying a block of the city without taking a step. Sounds pretty awesome, right? right? But the trouble is that when Lester shot the Metropolis battle, and this entire sequence was shot by Lester, he injected a bit of his trademark slapstick into it. Toupees fly off heads, phone booths fall over with people in them. It's all very silly. Which is a shame because he'd otherwise managed to take the battle pretty seriously up until this point. In the Donner cut, however, these jokes have been cut out, allowing the violence to stand slapstick free. So for my cut, that's what we're going with. After the battle, it's back to the Daily Planet stuff I just talked about. Then Zod and the crew go to the fortress to confront Superman, bringing Lex and Lois along. Once again, each cut has a different version of the scene. The Donner cut keeps it simple. It's largely a verbal confrontation between Superman and Zod with plenty of threats towards Lois's life sprinkled in. The Lester cut, however, adds some extra stuff, including Zod roasting Superman for building the fortress in the first place and Superman throwing plasticine shields at Non. I'm gonna get rid of the Lester stuff. Now, I've gone on record defending this stuff, and the thing is, I meant it. I think this battle is pretty fun, but it also contains several cutaways to a Gene Hackman impersonator to pretend that Lex is in the reshoot material and try to hide the fact that Hackman didn't turn up to the reshoots. I don't mind this in the context of the Lester cut, but in assembling a perfect cut of Superman 2, it doesn't really work for me, so Donner cut version of this scene. However, both Lester and Donner versions of the scene end the same way, with Superman tricking the Zod crew and depowering them all with red sun radiation. I could, in theory, use either cut for this, but the Lester cut has a soundtrack cue for the scene I prefer slightly, so I'm using that version here. Now, what happens after this is interesting. As assembled, both Lester and Donner cuts suggest that Superman straight up kills Zod and gang once they're depowered. See, they're thrown into an icy abyss and never seen again, so, like, they're dead. Moreover, both cuts have very funny fates for Lex Luthor. See, in the Lester cut, Superman and Lois fly away as Lex yaps about his plans to cut a deal with Superman, implying that Superman just left him running amok in the fortress. The Donner cut also has Superman fly away as Lex yaps, but then he stops, lands, then uses his heat vision to destroy the fortress, with presumably Lex still inside. Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, implies that Superman straight up murders Lex Luthor. Fortunately, there is a deleted scene that fixes both problems. In this deleted scene, something called the Arctic Patrol rocks up to the fortress and arrests both the Zod Squad and Lex, the latter going on to try and sell Superman as a pro wrestler. It's silly, but it solves the Zod murder and the leaving Lex in the fortress problems nicely, so I'm adding it back in. But once it's in, we're going back to the Lester cut for the ending. See, the two cuts of Superman 2 end in very different places. In the Lester cut, Superman and Lois fly away from the fortress, and Superman leaves Lois on the roof of her building. The next day, they try to work out where they're going, but it seems hopeless. So, Clark erases Lois's memory of his secret identity with a kiss. An amnesia kiss. After this, he goes back to the diner where he got beaten up to teach this guy a lesson, gives the White House a new flag for some America bullshit, then flies into space in the end. This is more or less the sequence I'm going with. I'm cutting the America bullshit because fuck that noise, but yeah, I'm keeping the amnesia kiss. Why, one may very well ask. Well, I have a choice. I can go with the amnesia kiss, which is stupid, or I can go with the Donner cut ending where Superman erases the entire movie by turning back time so it didn't happen, which is cataclysmically stupid. So given the choice, I'll take the amnesia kiss. It's silly, but it doesn't mean that any and all consequences for Superman over the movie are erased by a cheeky bit of time travel, so it could be a lot worse. And yeah, that's my vision of a perfect cut of Superman 2, or at least the best cut possible with what is available of what was shot at the time. In an ideal world, I continue to pilfer through the archives to see if Donner ever shot this part of the Zod Daily Planet scene where Ursa says they should take Lois to the fortress, but otherwise I'm pretty happy with this assembly of things. Incidentally, I've been doing this very roughly in a Premiere timeline as I've been writing this, and my extremely rough assembly of it comes to 2 hours, 7 minutes, and 45 seconds. A grand total of 15 seconds longer than the Lester cut. Somehow, in taking bits out and adding bits in and rearranging things, I've managed to keep the film at pretty much the same length as the original cut. That was a complete accident. Will I ever actually put in the effort to fully realize this cut? Maybe. I mean, it could be fun, but also knowing me, I get halfway through the process and then forget, then lose the file, then have to start from scratch. I mean, I did that with just the rough assembly I used to guide my writing here, and then I just didn't pick the project up again for 3 years. Anyway, that's my idea of how to recut Superman 2. But what are your thoughts? What would you do to fix this movie? Let me know in the comments, and in the meantime, like, subscribe, ring the bell, kneel before Zod, and have a good day.